This is Max Marcon. I'm here with Noel.
Hi.
We're here to explain Condorcet's paradox. So, when people make decisions, such as in an election, we expect the preferences to be transitive, which means that if you prefer X to Y and then Y to Z, you would prefer X to Z by extension. Okay. There is a situation, however, where this is not the case. It's called Condorcet's paradox. Um, Condorcet's paradox occurs when group preferences are cyclic, even if individuals' preferences are not. So, for example, in a Condorcet voting situation, a group of voters might prefer candidate A to candidate B, and then might prefer candidate B to candidate C, and yet they would prefer candidate C to candidate A. So you see intransitivity in the Condorcet voting situation. So I have here a sort of classic example of Condorcet's paradox in action. We have three guys, Joe, Bob, and Gary. Let's say they're UVA students and they have gone to the bar and they are deciding whether to order gin, rum, or whiskey. So their preferences are ranked here. So Joe prefers gin to rum to whiskey. Bob likes whiskey the best, followed by gin and then rum. And finally, Gary prefers rum to whiskey to gin. Okay. So let's make some observations here.
Okay.
So a majority of people prefers gin to rum. We can see that here. So gin, rum, rum, gin. That's the majority. Okay. And then also the majority prefers rum to whiskey. Rum, whiskey, whiskey, rum, whiskey. It's a majority. So in this case, if preferences are transitive, wouldn't that mean that the majority prefers gin to whiskey?
Yes.
Yes. No, that is not the case. Instead, we see that whiskey is preferred to gin. So gin, whiskey, whiskey, gin, whiskey, gin. That just doesn't make sense. Okay. So this is a Condorcet voting cycle.
Okay.
So if we write it out here, we see a majority prefers gin to rum to whiskey, but also gin again. It's circular. It keeps going. And what this tells us is that there's no clear majority. It's strategic stalemate.
Okay.
So what's the solution? Agenda setters. So an agenda setter is someone vested in one of these situations, like a legislature, with special power to, for example, set the order on which things are voted. And these types of people are extremely powerful in legislatures. You can think of like the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader as an example of an agenda setter. So Condorcet's paradox teaches us that these people are very important in group decision making. So I have a little addendum to our original situation. So now we vest Gary over here with agenda setting power. So he tells the others that that the order of the votes will be they'll vote first on gin versus whiskey, and then they'll vote on the winner against rum. So gin versus whiskey, who wins? Let's see, whiskey. So whiskey beats gin. And then when you put whiskey up against rum wins. So now with Gary having the agenda setting power, we get a clear majority. Rum wins. So that wasn't the case before. So what we see here is Gary manipulating the sequence of events to sort of give the appearance that majorities are winning when they aren't necessarily. So he has immense power in this game. So some implications of all this. So you might have noticed that Congress, it doesn't seem like Congress would have Condorcet cycles without situations where there aren't clear majorities. And that's because they have strong agenda setters, like the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader. Another implication of all this is what's known as Arrow's impossibility theorem, which tells us that when you can't decide on an outcome, like in an election, one person has to have more power than the rest. So that's what we take from this, the importance of agenda setters, and basically that sometimes there is no right choice, there is no outcome with the majority. Okay, so do you want to sum up the main points? So tell me first what a Condorcet paradox is.
So it's when you would expect for the results to be transitive within
Yes.
preferences, however they end up cyclical, and so therefore intransitive. So even if A is over B, if the majority prefers A over B,
Yeah.
prefers B over C, that doesn't mean that they prefer A over C. It makes it so it's impossible to define a majority group.
Yeah. So no majority appears to exist in those situations. So what does the existence of the Condorcet paradox speak to? What is it?
It provides a lot of power for those who are agenda setters,
Yes.
because they have the power to decide when people vote on certain things, therefore deciding which majority will be seen.
Yes. Yes. And it also shows us that sometimes elections or just voting in a legislature depends more on arbitrary factors than what would happen in a majoritarian election.
Yeah.
So, yeah.